We want to make sure that every kid feels comfortable, safe, and supported, cared for, and loved in our schools.
This week in the DCSD Notebook, we're checking our notes on bullying prevention in Douglas County schools. October is National Bullying Prevention Month, and this is the first of 2 episodes we're sharing because we know how disruptive, confusing, and downright scary it can be for students and their parents. So we're bringing out several leaders from all levels to talk about what bullying is, what it isn't, and how students' well-being is at the center of every school's response. I'm your host, Jason Hackett, Director of Communications for DCSD, and I hope you'll check out the resources linked in our show notes and listen to next week's Parent University episode, hosted by my colleague Amy Pfister, and featuring another panel of district leaders for Part 2 on bullying prevention. For now, though, let's get into Part 1. We have got an all-star panel here today to talk about a very serious topic, and I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we'll do our little icebreaker question that we start off with to just kind of humanize everybody, because everybody here around the table, as big of experts as they are and as important as their jobs are, we're all just people too. So I want to help you get to know them while we're having this conversation a little bit here. So my quick question is, and please first, when we go around the table as we're answering these questions, please introduce yourself, give us your name and title so that everybody knows who's who and can identify those voices. And then our question is, what movie, TV, or music star were you a huge fan of when you were growing up, but are kind of embarrassed about it now? So an example I'll give you for me, Steven Seagal. Pathetic. But when in high school, my friends and I were all about those stupid Steven Seagal movies. Completely embarrassing now. Not cool. Weird dude. There's an example for you. So.
All right.
Erin, let's start with you.
All right. I'm Erin Cruz. I have the privilege of being the Executive Director of Schools for the Castle Rock region. And goodness, I will say, if I'll go with a music one, Debbie Gibson.
Oh, yeah.
Used to Electric Youth cassette over and over until I had to get another one, but
I had a huge crush on her.
I don't know where she's at now.
Yes.
But she was amazing back in the 80s.
Back in the day, yep. You were either a fan of her or Tiffany, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Very cool. Jared, let's go with you.
Yeah, Jared Nicholson, principal at Mesa Middle School. And I would say I really loved all of the sports movies that I grew up with. And so Major League was always one of my favorites. And so, trying to be one of the players in the movie there in Major League. So
nice. I wish I could quote some of that, but probably some of them are a little not quotable on this podcast.
Yeah. It was, at first was Bull Durham, and I was like, that's probably not for this podcast.
Yes, can't do that one either. Excellent. All right, Trina.
Trina Hand, Health, Wellness, and Prevention Team Lead for Castle Rock and Parker regions. I would have to go with, let's see, an 80s singer. Probably, I don't know that I would be embarrassed by them now, because I think that the 80s was probably one of the best music genres. Maybe Pat Benatar, though.
Oh, very good.
Good one.
Pat Benatar. That's cool. Yes. Where was I the other day? And somebody was playing like the 80s, the dentist office. That's where I was. And they had an 80s channel on. And I was like, is this now the universal music that you can just play anywhere and it's totally all right with everybody?
Is it like dad rock?
I think
so. People call it dad rock. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all proud of that. That's cool. All right. So getting into the meat of why we're here and turning the conversation a lot more serious, we're going to talk about bullying. That's a frequent, consistent topic for schools from day one until school gets out and just keeps on going. It's a heavy duty thing. For students, for parents, for faculty and staff, it's a big deal. So we're really turning the corner here on all of our fun conversation and going to something that's serious and talking about what gets done here in Douglas County School District what can be done, resources for parents, resources for students, all that kind of stuff. And we've got really good experience around this table, some folks who deal with this and know how to work through all of these challenges. So the first thing I'd like to ask, and I'll just put this out to whoever wants to answer this, how do we define bullying? What is it and what isn't it? Because I've been through some bullying trainings and things too, and there are times when there are certain things that people think is bullying and it's not actually bullying. And we've got posters that we put in our schools that talk about sometimes people are just having a bad day, right? So who wants to answer that first question? How do we define bullying, and what are the parameters you put around that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump into that. Thanks, Jason. And I appreciate you setting the stage with the question, because oftentimes when it's bullying or just not being nice or mean or rude, there's such a difference. But at the end of the day, a lot of times we will classify, or students or parents will classify saying my kid's being bullied, right? And so I love the conversation of just even defining what it is. And so when we look at bullying, we really look at whether there's a imbalance of power. And so there's a few different pieces of criteria that we look at. And so one would be, the imbalance of power, but also something that's really intentional, repeated, or likely to be repeated. So that way it's not a one-off situation where one time somebody does one thing, hopefully we can, help educate and they can learn from it and it doesn't happen again. But this is truly intentional, repeated, and where they're really trying to have that imbalance of power. Sometimes when we have a bully situation, it will cause either physical, mental, or emotional harm as well to students. And we want to make sure that we can create, a better environment to help support those students. And so I think defining bullying where it's not going to be just because a kid is rude, it's not because somebody's being mean, it's not just because we have conflict. Sometimes we also have to think too that bullying isn't just because there's harassment or discrimination. And so really looking at the bullying in regards to, is it physical? Is it verbal? Is there some social bullying? Is there cyberbullying involved, which is a whole topic of its own, but really getting down to what bullying specifically is, and then how can, we help prevent, but also restore the problems that are happening within our schools.
Building off of that, then, I'm going to guess one of the things that helps to kind of dig into this when somebody comes to a teacher or a principal or different levels of administration or staff, it's a conversation, first of all, right? To kind of figure out, what is this? And is there a process of asking specific questions to kind of peel the onion, I guess, and have an idea how that works?
Yeah, and I can kind of speak to that a little bit of just from a school level, first and foremost, whether it meets the criteria. And I appreciate Aaron sharing the degree that bullying gets to, whether or not it reaches that level, or it's certainly just being mean or rude. Neither are okay in our schools. And so that's what we talk a lot about, is how we treat each other is important. How we take care of each other is important. And so for us, we want to make sure that we address them equally, especially from the onset, because we want to make sure that every kid feels comfortable, safe, and supported, cared for, and loved in our schools. And to do that, they have to make sure that they're set up to be successful, like all of our kids. And so when those come in, until you really start digging deeper into it, you're not going to know what level of mean, rude bullying this gets to. But every one that comes into us is important, and we take seriously to make sure that we're supporting that kid and that family as well. And so I do think it's just important to note that being mean and rude in our schools isn't okay either. We want to make sure every kid feels valued in our building. So
sure. Everybody around this table, except for me, obviously, you've all been principals. So what does bullying look like at the different levels, elementary school, middle school, and high school?
Sure. I can speak to the elementary school. It can be anything from name calling consistently to that imbalance of power, that power shift, physical behavior. It can occur in any specific situation or environment within the classroom, damaging somebody's belongings, continuously, repeatedly picking on someone, and potentially spreading rumors. And as we get into the 5th and 6th grades, it might bleed into that social media piece where Jared probably sees a lot more of that as well too. But there is that physical aspect as well too.
I think Trina's exactly right. It's for us, we see a lot of stuff on social media that's happening outside of school that's then impacting our school environment as well. And so I think a lot of the same stuff that Trina just shared, I mean, those things apply at the secondary level. I would say the influence of technology and phones and social media as the kids get older, that's one of the biggest outlets for kids and one of the pervasive times we see this stuff going on. So
then how about high school?
Yeah, with high school, I would say the social media absolutely doesn't help the situation. But when there's that targeted online shaming or that really subtle but specific social exclusion that happens, where sometimes the harassment of, whether it has to do with dating or identity, as they're becoming these young adults and really figuring things out. And sometimes, whether they spread personal content, there's possible that whether there's a threat of sorts, but it can amplify so much that oftentimes we have a great safety and security partnership with all of our SROs as well. And so our school resource officers really partner with our school administrators, especially at the secondary levels and at the high school level, to really ensure that when we do look into these concerns, that we have a lens from the school, but then is there going to be a legal lens as well? That are we, breaking the law? And are there going to be ramifications as well?
How about cyberbullying specifically? You've kind of touched on that a little bit. Is there really any differentiating cyberbullying from just the main term of bullying, or is it just it's a more specific type of bullying?
I would say it's more specific in drawing in, in that online forum, being able to be keyboard warriors, where kids are messaging on screen, whether it be games, over social media apps where it becomes abusive or hurtful. And it could be through post, it could be spreading of images, that consistent gossiping back and forth about an individual. Those are all examples, or passing along rumors, or sharing different login information for students as well too. That can be all classified as cyberbullying.
And I would say, I think one of the things that makes the social media component more concerning is the gravity of the audience, and that there's just so many followers and all the stuff, all the different social media stuff, that I feel like at times people are more apt to be mean and unkind to each other on social media because there's a bunch of people following and watching that. And there's an attention-seeking piece to that too. And I think that that's one of the concerns that I have on the social media side of this.
Well, sure, because that also that hits the victim of the bullying that much harder, because literally the whole world could see them being bullied. Mm-hmm. So what advice, what tips do we have for parents and for students on what to do when this is happening?
I will say at all levels, one of the most important things is that our students have a trusted adult at our building. When you have a trusted adult, you can have those open and honest conversations, especially when somebody is, being rude or mean or truly being a bully to one another. When they have those relationships with a trusted adult and a safe person at school, then the school will be able to, communicate with the child, communicate with the family to know what's going on so that they can then investigate, look into it, and see what they can do to help. Because if the school doesn't know about it, then this, the circle of control goes beyond the school. And so I think not only is it important to have those trusting relationships, but with the students, but with the families as well, where the parents can know that the school cares and wants to be able to be helpful. And so being able to have those open relationships where there's that safety and trust that we do care and that it is an absolute top priority. And then sometimes there's that anonymous piece where kids or families are concerned. And so I think it's, as a school district, making sure that we have things in place So that way they know how, like, parents or students know how to report out, whether, there's a variety of means of ways that we can report out, but ensuring that they feel safe as well, and heard, and that they know something's going to be done versus speaking to, an empty void.
Mm-hmm.
That strikes me as an interesting bit of clarification then, because it is important to have kind of that third party that's involved, because otherwise you've just got a lot of he said, or she said, or he said, she said, that kind of a thing, where somebody can be a little bit objective that's not like right in the middle of it, and where there's lots of heated emotions and things like that. So it helps that there's somebody there at the school to kind of come in and be that third party that can work towards some mediation then. Is that part of that role then?
Absolutely. And I would say people's perception is their reality. And so it's understanding all perceptions of what's going on and then being able to figure out the real narrative. Because oftentimes people's perceptions may skew the actual narrative of what happened and what we need to do to move on. And so I think that third party, and as a school, if that's something they can do to step in, and that way we're not just pointing blame and, figuring out consequences, but really being more reactive, and then we can be proactive with a lot of the resources that the district's been getting together and providing for our schools.
What happens? So say somebody comes into the principal's office or calls a principal and says, I think my kid's being bullied. Or maybe it's a student who actually steps up and is brave enough to say, I feel like I'm being bullied. Who should they talk to, and where does it go from there?
Just to reiterate, I think that line of communication is just essential, because every educator in our school district wants to support kids. That's why they do what they do. And the reality is, the conversation I have with that parent or with that kid is, we want to make sure that that kid is feeling valued and heard, and that he's feeling supported, and that family's feeling supported. And so that opening up that line of communication, from there, if a parent was to contact me, I would want to hear directly from the kid and have a conversation and see their perspective. And so we would initially start there. We can bring in counselors, we bring in our administrative team. We've got a wonderful relationship with our SRO if it looks like it's meeting a potential threshold of like harassment or something like that. And so based on the situation, our job is to make sure that we fully investigate everything that we go through. We treat everything seriously, and that we follow up and communicate with all parties that we're working with. And so I know you said earlier that sometimes, you get into he said, she said conversations and stuff like that. And so, we'll have conversations with teachers. The teachers or the adults in the cafeteria during commons time or lunchtime or whatever. We want to have those conversations. We utilize cameras to make sure that we're following up on that as well. And then at times we'll interview just kids in the area, witnesses that are there as well, to just make sure that we have a really strong scope of what's going on, so we can determine best next steps to make sure we're supporting all, and then we follow back up with each family and each kid that we speak with. So,
as a parent, there were times that I got really heated thinking about, if somebody's picking on my daughter, look out, right? And every parent is going to feel that way. They're going to want to defend their child, and they may come to the school really, really elevated and really upset and demand something gets done. First of all, what do you do in those kinds of situations? What should the parents expect to encounter when they come in? Of course, you would like them to come in a little calmed down and ready to listen, but sometimes things when it's your own kid, you can be pretty upset. What are the ways that the parents are then encountered, and what kind of ways do you work to help them?
Yeah, I think the first thing we like to do, as principals, is making sure that parents feel heard, and that their voice matters and their concerns matter as well too. And so while a principal may have a million things going on a day, we try to make time and space for safety matters, and treat those as a top priority. And sitting down with the family and really understanding their concerns, giving them time to tell us where they heard, whether it be their child reported or somebody else reported, and then going into that investigative process. And we have a process that we use through the district to determine if the situation is truly bullying, making sure that we inform all parties. But one thing we really like to talk to our parents about is seeking to understand. It's so easy as a parent to just jump to conclusions and to want to defend your child. I know I get that mama bear mentality when something happens to my child, so that's natural. We also want to seek to understand and understand that the truth lies in the middle of those two stories. And so we try to do a really good job, especially teaming up with our mental health team, to investigate the situation and then inform all parties and then create some sort of plan in place to be able to support both parties to ensure that safety, that there's a commitment to safety and to conflict resolution. And we usually do that through a restorative approach.
What do you mean by restorative approach? What is that?
So if both parties are comfortable and there is some sort of conflict that does occur, we try to, with permission of families, bring the two parties together, see if we can resolve the conflict with the two parties, and seeking to figure out where the conflict lies, where the truth lies in the matter from both sides, and giving students voice to express how they felt when that action was delivered upon them. And then giving, whether it be the accused or the alleged victim as well too, giving them both an opportunity to speak their minds as well too, and then come to some common agreements and common respectful behaviors to engage in moving forward. And then having some opportunity to restore how the person was impacted, how the environment was impacted, if they impacted other peers as well too, being able to reconcile with them, and then how do they reintegrate back into the classroom or into the environment when someone else has been harmed as well.
What do you do when there's a student who is claiming that they feel they've been bullied, and there's not a lot of other people that maybe believe them or support them, or even in the case, there was a time when one of my own daughters was being bullied, and I didn't fully believe it at first. And it took me a while to get an understanding of this, that I sort of downplayed it, because most of the time I'm guessing you have a lot of parents that go to DEFCON 4 immediately, right? But there's some that are like, well, I don't know about that. And then the student actually doesn't feel very supported. What do you do in those kinds of situations where the student may not have a lot of people backing them, but is pretty sure something is not cool with how they're being treated? And so they decide to come to somebody at the school and ask about that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to just, again, I think we said earlier, like, perception can become reality. And if that's how that kid is feeling, regardless if that is the reality or not, is that kiddo able to truly focus on the most important things of being at school when they're feeling all these other things? And so from my standpoint, we just make sure we rally around that kid, and we make sure that we're putting in like potentially daily check-ins with the counselor or our mental health team, just to make sure that kiddo's doing okay. Contacting the teacher or teachers that the kiddos may have the same class together, but making sure that we're validating at least how they're feeling, and making sure that they walk away feeling supported and cared for by the adults around them. And so that's what we'll do is we call it a rally around, and we get everybody there to make sure that we're supporting that student. And then also it increases eyes and visibility. And so when we increase eyes and visibility, if there is truth or reality to that, we're either seeing it or we're deterring it. And so that's our approach from a school. Even when we don't have evidence, we still want to make sure we're supporting that kid.
And then how about the flip side then? I'm sure there's also times when there's somebody who is sure that they're being bullied, and maybe their parent is, very much taking their side. But you do the investigation and you find that there's really nothing there, or you can't find any proof of it anyway. How do you handle that then? And I'm sure then the parents are probably not real happy at that point either then.
I will say that, there may be an investigation done and it may turn out that it's not bullying, but it's still not nice behavior, right? And so that's where a lot of times our schools do such a great job of some reactive work, but then also we're really trying to shift that mindset to do some preventative work, right? So if we can front load, especially in the beginning of the school year, to teach our students, even from the youngest of ages, whether it's pre-K or 3 and 4 year olds, all the way to our seniors in high school, that we want to make sure that we're giving them every opportunity to truly understand, and teaching some of those skills like empathy, or teaching the skills that maybe we do not always say we have all the time in the world. So, we got to pack in the standards and teach them reading, math, and the writing. But there's so many of the social pieces that we have to make sure our kids are feeling okay in the learning environment. So that way, when we protect that learning environment, they can grow and achieve academically. But they're not going to focus on the academics if something internally is bothering them. And so there's a social emotional piece to our education that has really changed and shifted over the last decade or so, of being able to embed social emotional learning into our classrooms. And so it's not just a one-off, 30-minute lesson with their counselor every once in a while, but truly having those teachable moments when there's a conflict at recess, when there's a disturbance in the hallway or at the lunchroom or during a sporting event, something that we can take that moment and help them work through it, and then be proactive to have them understand a little bit more behind it, so that it doesn't hopefully happen again. But it's more of teaching it, just because I feel like there's a lot of times assumed that kids know how to self-regulate, or kids understand certain behaviors or aspects. But a lot of that social emotional learning is what we're finding is there's a disconnect with so much screen time. There's a disconnect with so much interpersonal skills, that those are things that we truly have to, as society and with an education, make time for to help and teach our children.
That's a really interesting point too, because it goes to kind of thinking about what are best practices for helping to support your own child. Obviously we're not here to tell parents how to do anything or what they should do. But if you're talking about looking for resources for what are best practices, what are good ways to support their own children and support the work that is being done in the schools to help them learn how to regulate, learn how to deal with things, build some resilience, build some empathy, whichever, if they're the bully or the bullied, what are some of those best practices? What are the wise things that people can do to help everybody get a little bit better?
I think as a parent, the first thing you want to do is be an active listener. Just asking around the dinner table at night, how was your day? What were some things that were highlights of your day? What were some low points of your day? And really listening to your kids. Oftentimes we get so busy in our evenings as well too that we may neglect those conversations. And we don't intend to do that, but that may pass by the wayside. And so really carving out that family time to reflect on everybody's day, that's where you're going to pinpoint some of the opportunities where you may discover some of those conversations or some of those interactions with students throughout the day. And being an active listener, making sure your child has a voice, and when there is a concern, ensuring that you're reaching out to someone at the school level, whether it be the child's teachers or an assistant principal or mental health team or the principal, because the more that we know, the more that we can offer that wraparound support. And then engaging in those conversations of how do we support that student at the school level. That's, I think, a great place to start. There's a wealth of resources that we have for conflict management, teaching our children to be adaptable and to be resilient, like you had talked about, and how do we have grit and grace as well too for others. But there's a wealth of resources that we have on our bully prevention site, on the DCSD website as well too, that has a lot of resources for parents.
And we'll make sure to link those in the show notes of this episode too, so people can get to them really easily.
I think that's fantastic. I would just add, I think creating an authentic opportunity for parents and kids to have a conversation and share. And I think the biggest thing from my lens as a principal is the worst thing I want is a kid not to tell the parents that we can't support the kid. We want to make sure the kid's voice is there if something's happening. And so, we want to encourage our kids and our parents to have that open dialogue at home, to be able to have those conversations. And, when we talk with parents, and even if they come in and they're in a heightened state and they're upset, like, that's, as principals, it's our job to empathize with them. They obviously care about their kid just like we care about their kid. And I think, once we come in and we listen and we share with them that, our intention and their intention is the same, and that's to support your kid. And I think for me, it's the kids that don't share, that are enduring and not sharing that scares me the most. And so that would be the advice I would give to parents, is make sure that you're having that authentic dialogue, that kids aren't keeping this inside. So
absolutely. Have those conversations. Talk to them even when they don't want to talk. They get to that age, right? I'm guessing, late elementary and middle school is maybe the peak of that. Like, how was your day? Fine. That kind of a thing. And they don't want to talk about stuff, especially if something's really eating at them. And can that be considered a bit of a sign of, like, if they're just really like, don't talk to me, that maybe something is eating at them? Some parents haven't dealt with this yet. Sometimes, yeah, they just don't want to talk. Other times, they just don't know how to put words to what they're feeling, right?
Kids are going to share in different ways. And so the people that know our students the best are their parents, right? And so the parents working through saying, okay, some kid wants to journal about, how they're feeling. That's perfect. Give that outlet. Summer, let's go play basketball and we'll have a conversation to do that. I think finding a way for parents to connect with kids and have those conversations, that the kid is choosing the path of what that looks like, just opens up that communication so much. So
a couple more questions, because we've been at it for a while. I want to value all of your time. We talk a little bit about the route people should go when they've got a concern. And I've seen this. I've worked in 3 different school districts, and there's been times where people immediately go straight to the superintendent or the board. Can you talk a little bit about why that probably isn't the most effective way to go? And I'm not trying to be flippant about it. It's truly not the best way to go, right?
Right. And I would say, great question. And the people that are closest to the student, closest to the source, are going to be able to be the boots on the ground that can look into the situation immediately. And so we always say, start with the teacher, right? Start with the adult that is there in that school setting, in that situation. When we start with the teacher and we can empower the teacher to have that relationship with the students, a lot of times the students feel really trusted because they love their teachers. And so if they're able to trust their teacher and be open with their teacher, they're going to get a lot more information than if there's going to be other people that maybe they don't have a relationship with, starting to ask them questions, they may just shut down. And so I think it's that relationship piece that they have with their trusted adult, specifically a teacher, where then if it does need to escalate to others, sometimes that's when our mental health or our counselors do get involved. Sometimes administrators get involved, just to ensure that the students are feeling heard. But then it's also that we're creating and understanding the narrative of what happened. And then we follow our code of conduct. We follow our district protocols of what we need to do. And we have great partners with our health, wellness, prevention department that has, whether it's team leads or directors there, that really work intently with our counseling and our administrators to ensure that they're trained in a variety of protocols, but also that they're just available. I will say just the amount of support that the districts had has increased tremendously over the past even just couple of years. And I only see it continuing to have some supports for that social emotional learning. And the support there is going to be instrumental, I think, with helping not just educate our students, but educating our parents and our teachers. There's a lot of times that when you go to teacher school or principal school, you don't have all these classes about social emotional learning or, if it was back in the day, the pedagogy is so content driven and standards based, where children are different now. And so it really is making sure that we're meeting with the kids where they're at, utilizing our resources with the health, wellness, prevention, with school leadership, and also our EOO office. We have some great supports through investigators within our EOO office, and they're just fantastic resources to help and support families, students, and the schools.
Going straight to the top actually could slow things down if you're trying to help, because you go straight to the top and go, here's my problem. And then, of course, they're going to want to help, but they then have to backtrack and find all the people that are actually the people closest to it, like you talked about, Erin.
Absolutely.
And so there's could be the delay in just finding the right people to talk to, and that slows down the reaction time. And you never know when, with whatever the issue might be, sometimes time is of the essence with this. So talking to the people that are closest to the situation and know these kids, that's the best way to go then, right?
Absolutely. And especially if, there's either an email sent or they come in and want to be heard. Like mentioned earlier, sometimes there's already meetings happening or different things going on. And so an emergency and a crisis to a family is always, of the utmost importance. But we just have to make sure that we have that right time delegated to do a thorough investigation and not just brush it off or sweep it under, because it is important. And the safety, security, and just the psychological safety of all of our students, our staff, our parents, it's of the utmost importance. And it's just how I believe education's shifted so much over the past decade or so, where it's about test scores, and yes, it's about the academic progress and growth, but we're raising these humans that have so many other needs now as society has changed. And so just making sure that we're meeting parents as well, and students with all the desires that, are going to help support them and raising their kiddos.
Sure. And it's complex, and every human being is a little bit different, and you have to figure out what makes every person tick and help them find ways to regulate. I keep going back to that. Kids have to figure that out, and it's getting harder and harder with all the media that's in front of them, social media and things, that it's just that much harder to learn those lessons really, really well. And so it's a challenge. And so everybody hopefully can stop and think about that and be a little patient with it, hopefully. And another piece of that patience too, I know I've seen this before, where some parents come away frustrated because they don't get to learn the whole story about what's going on. Can somebody talk to the responsibility we have from a legal aspect, that there are certain things that can't necessarily be shared in certain types of situations?
I'm a big proponent of sharing as much as we can with parents, because I do feel like, again, when we are dealing with these situations, we're working as partners with both sides and both families. And that's how I see this, as a partnership with the school and both families. What we're doing in terms of what we can share, we do have FERPA laws that we have to go through, that we can't share individual student information. A lot of times we'll get the question of, so we're handling the situation, here's what's happening. And the first question we'll get is, who's the kid, right? And it's like, unfortunately, we can't share who the other kid is, just like we can't share your kid's name with the other family. But here are the things that we're doing to ensure that both kids moving forward are in a safe place to able to continue to have a productive time here at school. And so that's the biggest one we get, is typically like student names, identification, stuff like that. Past history we'll get quite a bit too, of like, what is this student's history? Does he have a criminal history? Has he been suspended before? And those are things as well as that fall under FERPA of just not being able to share. And so those specific identifying factors, honestly, when I have conversations with parents, I recognize like that doesn't feel great that I can't share this, but you wouldn't want me sharing if it was the other side of the phone call about your kid as well. And so that's how I have those conversations. But I also, as a parent myself, there's information you wish you were privy to that unfortunately you're just not, based off of our FERPA regulations. And so those are the one, like, student names and history are the two that come up the most for us, for sure.
I would say
I
consequences
was going to do that too.
because oftentimes parents want to know, well, what are you doing about it? And we can always talk to them about their own child, but we're not able to talk to them about consequences for another child. And that's where there's a trust piece that as a school, like we have to build those trusting relationships with our families that we know we can tell you anything and everything about your own child in any of those parameters. But when it comes to other children, because of safety and confidentiality, we don't disclose and we're not legally allowed to. And so sometimes that is really hard for parents to understand. And we understand their concern with that. But at the end of the day, we have to, follow the law with what they can know. And I feel like sometimes parents have a desire they want to know anything and everything. And that's just unfortunately, but fortunately, that's not how this is. We can talk to them about their children and ensure that safety and go from there. But we cannot give them additional information that oftentimes in social media or in other people's narratives, that's when things often change within narratives, and then additional information or assumptions get put out there, which causes bigger strife and, false information, which is unfortunate. But as a school district, we have our duty to follow FERPA and not disclose and, disclose as much as we can, like Jared said, but not, and have that trust, but we can't break the law either.
Exactly. Okay. Is there any points you'd like to make that I didn't get to? Some key aspect of your work?
I would just say report,
Mm-hmm.
right? We want all people to know that they can go on the Douglas County School District website. There's a bully prevention page that we'll link in here, and it has a reporting mechanism that there's a bully reporting form that anybody and everybody can fill out, and that automatically will send an email to the designated administrators and support staff at the school that they have chosen on the reporting form so that the school immediately can do something about it. Sometimes people will use Safe to Tell. Sometimes people will email teachers or stop in or call principals. So however they want to report it, because schools can't do anything if we don't know. And so we would rather have over reporting to know what's going on. So that way we can address issues, whether it's bullying or maybe it turns out not to be bullying, but we can still address the concern at hand because that's important and we need to protect that learning environment. So report. And I think it's when we have the good relationships with our families and our students, they will report. So continue to embrace those positive relationships with the schools and the district to be able to have that voice.
I think to piggyback off of what Erin said too is in trusting the adults at the school that they are going to do their due diligence to investigate any claims that come in, and they will share out whatever pertinent information that they can, as well as a support plan to make sure that student feels safe and has access to learning as well too. And we have some great resources at the district level as well too. We've rolled out some new programs, which we'll get to talk about in our part 2 of this podcast. But just focusing in on that social emotional wellness and preventative strategies or preventative curriculum that we're rolling out across the district system wide to support students in building some of those future ready skills.
That's a great tease for next time. That's excellent. Thank you. So tune into the next episode. We'll talk more about that side of things too. That's great.
I was just going to say that I think just being proactive at how you're setting your culture in your building and, making sure from day one, we get in and we're the Mesa Bears and we talk about what it means to be a bear and how we take great care of each other. And the way we treat each other is important. And that's how our students treat each other, how our students treat the adults in the building and vice versa. And we make commitments day one of how we're going to treat each other. And I think ensuring that any form of bullying is not going to be tolerated and allowing the culture of taking care of each other to be the culture in your school and not the culture of harming each other. And so we'll have kids that are be like, hey, we don't do this here. Even if it's just somebody's being mean, we don't do this here. It's not who we are. It's not what it means to be a bear. When I hear kids talking to kids using those kind of phrases, It tells me that our culture is helping to proactively, we'll address it reactively, but if there is bullying that's happened that we're having to address, that kid has had to endure whatever had happened there. And so also I think the other part of this is how can we get in front of kids to change the culture around bullying and how we take care of kids and how we take care of each other. And I think that's an important part for schools to focus on.
Thank you all very, very much. This was a really enlightening conversation. Such great expertise from all of you and an insight into kind of the mechanisms of how this all works and some reinforcement that there's a lot of support out there for students in all of our schools. Thank you all very, very much. And then listeners, please tune in for the next episode when we'll dig into more of the resources that are available and programs that are taking place in our schools to really help educate our kiddos. Thanks for listening to DCSD Notebook from Douglas County School District, which serves more than 60,000 students, making it the third largest public school district in Colorado. With 92 schools, including neighborhood schools, charter options, and homeschool support, DCSD is a welcoming home for every style of learner. To find out more, visit dcsdk12.org. And make sure to hit the follow button in your favorite podcast app so you can get every new episode, as well as Parent University once a month, where we hear from experts within the district and from the larger community talking about timely, relevant issues that parents face in our complex world. We're here to help you, so if you have a question and can't find the answer on our website, email communications@dcsdk12.org and we'll help point you in the right direction.